James Zimmerman, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
If you wouldn't mind, I know that your story is famous within music circles, but if you wouldn't mind recounting not only your background, but some of the controversy that was associated with your name a few years ago.
Sure. Most people publicly know me as the former principal clarinetist of the Nashville Symphony, but my background is not in classical music. My background is in theater. I'm the son of two theater musicians. My mom is an actress and pianist, and I got my start growing up in New Jersey by community theater and local advertising and dance classes. I was a tap dancer, ballet dancer. And when I was 9 years old, after having some success in musical theater in New Jersey, my mom said, there's this open call for a Broadway show called the Will Rogers Follies in New York, and I want to take you to the audition just so you can get the experience, see what it's like. So 400 people showed up looking for 3 jobs in a Broadway show. This is the Tony Award Best Musical winner in the year 1991. I was part of the replacement cast, and I won the audition. I went just for fun and I won. 400 people showed up, 3 people got jobs. So I ended up doing that for a year. And that's where I met Donald Trump because his wife, Marla Maples, had a role in the show. So Trump was hanging around all the time, talking to my dad when he was picking up me and Trump was picking up his girlfriend, Marla Maples. My dad and Trump used to talk about the weather. And that's kind of how I got my first glimpse into that whole situation, which may come up later in the podcast. But yeah, show business is where I got my start. After I left the show, I did a lot of jingle singing. And then I got serious about making music with instruments. Played clarinet and saxophone in my school band. And I continued tap dancing professionally in the New Jersey Tap Ensemble. But then when high school came to an end, I started to think about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And though I had had great success in the arts and in Allstate and in all sorts of areas of show business, I above all else, wanted to be a regular guy with a wife and kids. So I settled upon the orchestra route because that's the closest thing to a steady job that a musician can have. So even though classical music is not the kind of music I'm most passionate about, it made the most sense from a practical standpoint. So I went to the University of Southern California for my undergrad. It's the best clarinet school in the world. Then the University of Minnesota. Got a job in a small orchestra called the Pacific Symphony right out of grad school, played there for a year, and then came to Nashville in 2008, where I've been ever since. I played principal clarinet there for 12 years, along with starting a career as a freelance studio musician. There's a very vibrant studio scene here in which I have played for every imaginable type of commercial music, from video games to movies to Netflix shows to political events to anything that you have heard music recorded. I'm on that kind of thing. Like if you walk through the Magic Kingdom in Disney World now and you hear Begin the Beguine playing on Main Street, that is me. So most people have heard me play whether they know it or not. And I had a little dynasty here in Nashville. You know, Nashville is not the biggest symphony orchestra in the country. It's not the Chicago Symphony. It's not the New York Philharmonic. But I enjoyed a diverse career of all types of stuff. Teaching, I was a professor at Vanderbilt as an adjunct a few times. I have done masterclasses and guest recitals, and I've had just a wonderful career. And in the second half of the 2010s, with the first Trump term, I noticed a narrative coming into the Nashville Symphony, into the classical music world as a whole, that we needed to apologize for our lack of diversity. And while I was sympathetic to that issue and thought at the time that diversity could be a huge asset to the classical music industry, I saw the sinister underside of it up close when the Nashville Symphony began shoehorning as many non-white and non-male and non-Catholic and non-familial people into the orchestra as possible. None of those are descriptions that I fit. And I saw a lot of hostility, stood up to it, and picked the battle. And lost in 2020, right before the pandemic hit. So I spent the pandemic in this very basement learning to write software. And by the end of that year, I was up and running as a Salesforce developer. I still work at Salesforce. It's a great job, pays the bills, it's gratifying, and it engages a part of my design brain that music never did. So I get to use a part of creativity and software that I never expected to use. And I still freelance as a player in studios. I still have a few students, and I do remote recording for whoever wants me to play. So I'm a musician first. I'm a tech guy by day, and I still have a really vibrant and fulfilling life as a musician. It's just not in the orchestra game anymore.
Could you talk a little bit about orchestra culture? I want to get into the diversity hiring in a moment, but I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with what it's like behind the scenes in a not a regional orchestra, but in this case, a full-time professional orchestra. What is that? What is that like?
Well, it's a great job, but it's not necessarily full time, and this is something that we always have trouble explaining to our management and to our board when they want to pay us as little as possible. The job basically is like 20 hours a week in the job, because you rehearse for half the week, and then for the other half of the week you play performances. Now that 20 hours doesn't include all the instrument maintenance and practicing and keeping yourself in shape. Like it's a little bit like being an athlete. You have to work out. You have to meditate or do whatever you need to do to be at the top of your game at 8 o'clock p.m. on a Friday night when you're tired from your whole week and the people are there paying money to hear you do your job. And if you screw up, you're right there hanging out in front of everybody. So it is a full-time gig. It's a vocation more than a gig. But an orchestra job leads to many other things. Like I said, like it's a resource center is how my teacher always used to describe it. It's like your home base. And the culture of the group is there's a somewhat adversarial relationship between the labor, which is the musicians, and the employer, the management. And if you've followed any of the local or any of the politics going on in this country, like right now, the San Francisco Symphony is in a huge uh, conflict with their musicians because of pay cuts, and the pandemic, it seems, has really ravaged the business from a cultural standpoint. And on top of the cultural issues of 2020, which we'll get to, it's not a very good culture. Honestly, I know I'm oversimplifying by saying it's not very good, but it's not the type of supportive and uplifting culture that it was in 2008 when I joined it. A lot of people seeing the writing on the wall for the industry, especially as the human attention span is ever shortening with the advent of tech and social media and the iPhone. I mean, I sound like the old get off my lawn guy, but it really is a factor. We are geared towards shorter, ever-present entertainment, and sitting through a Bruckner symphony is not something that the average person is really capable of anymore.
On symphonies for a moment, diversity hiring has been something that has grown exponentially, it would seem. And it's not just in symphonies, it's also in universities. Professors are encouraged to have a diverse studio. And actually, on that point for a moment, was that something that ever happened to you at Vanderbilt?
Vanderbilt, no.
Okay.
But I was just an adjunct professor there, filling in for a professor who was on leave. So I came in on a temporary basis, and I was the local symphony principal. So I was the logical choice to come in temporarily. But I have seen that phenomenon happen at the Blair School of Music. That's Vanderbilt's music school, for those who don't know. But I did have an experience at another university. Maybe this is how you saw my viral tweet a couple days ago, talking about how in 2016 I was noticing the writing on the wall in the symphony business in starting 10 years ago in 2015, and I had seen a couple of my clarinet colleagues make the jump from major orchestras to big academic institutions, and I thought, that actually seems pretty smart, because there could be a lot of advantages to doing something like that. Free tuition for my kids, and just like a more flexible lifestyle. So I threw my hat into the ring for this major university job. And I made it all the way to the finals. This is the first time I'd ever done it, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was just kind of winging it the whole time. But I got flown out to the school. I did a master class. I met the dean. I worked with students. I gave some lessons and all this. And ultimately, the job went to somebody else who was much more qualified than me. But I was just happy to get to the end. And I solicited feedback from a couple people on the hiring committee. And this one professor who is legendary in his field called me up afterwards. He's like, "You'll never believe what happened when we presented our chosen candidate to the dean." He said, "Can you guys keep searching for somebody who's a little bit less white?" And this guy was just like appalled that the dean would say something like that. Like, this is 2016. If this happened now, we would not bat an eye, but this is a long time ago. And I thought, like, what a joke, honestly, that's what it's going to come down to at the end. Like, this university goes through a year screening resumes, spending all this money to bring people out to look at master classes and recordings and qualifications, and that's really what it boils down to at the end, is like, we can't have another white guy on staff. So ultimately they did hire that white guy, and they kind of like kept the search going a little longer as like a dog and pony show to give the appearance that they were looking for something. But I don't even think that would happen nowadays. But that was my first clue that something was really afoot in the classical music business to bump up the diversity numbers.
Why do you think that orchestras are leaning towards this diversity hiring? Actually, no. Let me rephrase that. That's a rather easy question to answer. Why is it wrong to want to do diversity hiring? Like, if I was in, let's say, a majority Hispanic culture or a majority Black culture, even in a local community, and I'm looking around and I want to bring on somebody who looks like the community, why is that, at least in classical music, wrong?
Well, the example that always gets brought up is the NBA. It just so happens that most professional basketball players are Black. They seem to be better suited. They're, for whatever reason, whether it's cultural or genetic, I don't know. I don't care. I grew up, I loved basketball. By the way, I loved things that would be basically considered Black when I was growing up. I loved sports. I listened to a ton of hip hop. I watched a lot of MTV. I was a tap dancer. The head of the New Jersey Tap Ensemble was a Black woman. My clarinet teacher for the first 3 years of high school was a Black guy. Like, I just didn't care. Like, I think it's wrong to care too much. Like, I used to, kind of pussyfoot around this issue and say the kind of Seinfeldian, not that there's anything wrong with diversity, because I was being forced to care about it because my institution, the Nashville Symphony, was caring about it so much, and I didn't want to get in trouble. But now I shamelessly say that I just do not care at all about diversity. And a lot of people who are on the other side of this ideological debate will say that I have the luxury of not caring because I'm white, and it's part of the white racial frame of this country. This country's white supremacist, and I have the luxury of not noticing. And I'm not sure how to refute that argument. I'm just not going to care about it. Now, to your example, if we're in a primarily Hispanic community and we put out an orchestra that doesn't have any Hispanics in it, and the Hispanic people feel alienated because of that, okay, I think there's some legs to that. So what has been the solution? It's like, let's program some diverse literature. Like, let's program some music that is not all from Europe. We don't have to play Beethoven and Brahms and Mozart on every concert. And that is totally cool with me because, like I said, classical music is not my passion. I mean, I like it a lot, but I like a ton of other music. I mean, I like the Bee Gees. I like disco. I like the Notorious B.I.G. I like anything good. So the more different types of music we play, artistic diversity, that's great. I'm totally in favor of that. I will listen to anything good except country. Very little country is anything that
Wow,
I
and you're
would
from
consider good.
Nashville. That's
I
quite
know.
the hot take.
I've been here for 17 years and I've really tried to like it, but it's just like a small sliver. I'm a Northeasterner at heart. But yeah, it's not necessarily wrong to try to diversify an orchestra. And sometimes it is nice to have the diverse perspectives. I'm not disagreeing with that, but at the end of the day, we should all be ignoring our own identities when we get on the stage and taking on the identity of the music. Like, I'm a clarinetist. That means you got to play a lot of different characters because the clarinet has such a diverse range of colors and styles. Like, it's different than the other woodwind instruments because it has, like an extra octave of range on the oboe. So if you're playing something like Ravel's Mother Goose. You might be playing the role of Sleeping Beauty. If you're playing The Miraculous Mandarin, you might be playing the role of a tortured prostitute. But if you're playing Rimsky-Korsakov's Capriccio Espagnol, you're playing the role of a matador, something extremely macho. So you need to have a diverse palette of colors from which you can draw. But who cares when I'm playing those pieces about me? I'm a conduit for the music at that point. I'm just some guy, not even some white guy. It doesn't even matter if I'm a man or woman. I'm just trying to become the thing that I'm conveying. So this obsession with the identity of the players is totally backwards and totally against how we should be listening to music. I mean, let's face it, people listen with their eyes. You know, the visual component of a live performance as compared with a recording it's very stimulating. You know, you see 80 people on stage moving in tandem. You hear the harmonies in the air around you. You feel the vibrations of the sound. It's a totalizing experience. And sometimes the music itself can get lost in that experience. But if people would just listen with their eyes closed, the people on stage would disappear and you would just hear the story being played before you. So it's my long answer to your question is I don't think we should care that much about the gender or sexual orientation or race or political stances of our musicians. I just don't think we should care.
Just hanging on this point for one more moment. With blind auditions, oftentimes what happens is the people who are selected for these auditions do tend to be, not always, not exclusively, but do tend to be white. Now, I know when the blind auditions went up, more women were hired, interestingly. But most of the people who get hired into at least the major orchestras tend to be white. And they're not only white, they usually tend to be like Eastern European, Croatian, Hungarian, Russian. Why is that the case? And that's not to that's not to accuse anyone of why these people are hired, because it's a blind audition. But why is it when the blind auditions do happen, these are the people that are generally hired?
Great question. So you mentioned women, and I think this is a huge point to look at. So blind auditions, I'll just say this right off the bat, they're the way to go. It's a flawed system, the audition system, because auditions are not the job at all. You know, you've got this Olympic competition is what an audition is like. Okay, man, you get up on stage there by yourself. You got to fly here. You get 5 minutes to play, and you have to play an excerpt from a Beethoven symphony and a Mozart concerto and a Ravel tone poem and all this back to back to back to back on the same reed, under scrutiny in an empty hall. It's so different. It's so much harder than actually playing a concert in the orchestra. So it's a gameable system, and for many years, like you said, Eastern European men were the best at this game. Now, in the 60s or so, when the blind audition kind of came into be, it was the musicians pushing for this, because they're like, you know, why should a conductor be able to just like pick whoever he wants to come into the orchestra? Like, what about everybody else that's just as qualified, but they don't have any connections, they don't have any money, they don't have the ability to go to Juilliard? You know, like, don't we want the best people? Like, the best way to do this is put up a screen, eliminate bias, sexual bias, racial bias, like fat people bias, anything, any kind of bias that might come up. And what happened when we did that? All of a sudden, a lot of women started getting jobs. What does that tell us? That there was a ton of sexism going on, like some actual real sexism going on. Now orchestras are essentially 50-50, men and women. But it didn't help bump up the amount of minorities. Why is that? That's a good question. Maybe it's because minorities just don't excel as well as Eastern European white men at this. Now, there will be those who say that's evidence that there is some racism somewhere. We just have to find it. And that sprouted a whole cottage industry of people who are looking for that racism and pointing at it where it does not exist, and canceling people over refusing to engage wholeheartedly in the search for the racism that they don't think is there. They're looking for the boogeyman. So what is the answer to that? for the people who want diversity. They want equality. They want, because there's 13% of this country is black, they think 13% of orchestras should be black too. So we get social programs, we get free lessons for minorities. I'm not against any of this, because let's be honest, like Jim Crow, slavery, redlining, all that stuff happened. It's like some of the grossest stuff in American history, and it's shameful. But you got to look at the other side of that coin, which is America got over slavery faster than any nation in history. And the founding fathers, while yes, some of them are slave owners and there's some sordid history to all that, they found an ingenious way to write into the Constitution a system in which their future father countrymen would be able to legislate it out, which they did. So yes, it's part of the framework of the country. Yes, the echoes of slavery and Jim Crow are still reverberating in certain pockets of America, but racism is on life support, being kept alive by people who are benefiting from it being there. So the answer to your question, why? Why do we not see diversity numbers bumping up organically? It could just be because certain different cultures have different interests, certain people are drawn to certain different things. Like America as a country, for instance, isn't really that into soccer. It's not because we don't have great athletes. We just are playing American football. That's our game. That's where our best athletes go. It's not that we're inferior to the Serbians or to the Italians or to the French. We choose different things based on our culture. And just constantly looking at every movie studio and sports team and university and orchestra for racial disparity is so misguided, and it is a huge albatross on the system of meritocracy, which is what America is founded on. People like to rail against capitalism. It has its flaws, but it does allow for the best people to rise to the top, and that's really a problem for orchestras. So blind auditions, they are the best system. I have had my faith in them shaken, perhaps even destroyed, by what happened at the Nashville Symphony in 2019, and what is happening behind the scenes now as the diversity people are pushing for advantages for minorities and fellowships and struggle sessions via HR, just all to try to reach this ultimate goal of equality. And I don't think it's been good on the whole.
Do you think orchestras can come back? I know the numbers are dropping in general across the board. Do you think that has something to do primarily with diversity hiring rather, or is it more of the, like you mentioned earlier, the shorter attention spans? People just don't want to listen to an entire symphony.
I think that the push for diversity has alienated some people. Like, I have talked to these people on X.com. Like, as soon as I lost my symphony job in 2020, I took to X with my 400 followers and looking for people who would understand what happened. That what happened was a major miscarriage of justice. I was just no innocent bystander, and like I said, we can get more into the details of that if you want. But I believed that it was a good illustration of a dangerous future that we were, or I should say, like a cliff that the country was heading off of. And if the kind of ideas that overtook and destroyed the Nashville Symphony were applied at scale, the country would really suffer. And I felt like that prophecy came true with the death of George Floyd 3 months later, when I'm sitting on my couch watching Nashville's courthouse burn, saying to my wife, "Look, babe, there it is. I said this was going to happen. It is now happening. This whole country is totally drunk on this stuff." And we got to see that in certain pockets form where postmodernism was incubating for a while in universities, in left-leaning institutions like orchestras and Hollywood and stuff like that. So the number of people I've met on X who have said, "I'm absolutely disgusted by these diversity efforts and the cancellations," that's not a lot of people. A lot of people just don't care. And they're like, whatever. I love the symphony. If they're going to bring in a few more minorities, I can't really tell the difference. I'm fine with it. Diversity is great. A lot of people don't think about this stuff on a very deep level. They don't do the homework. They don't know that it has its roots in Marxism. And it's just kind of like a communist push via the arts. And it's sort of a psyop, as we say on Twitter. But mostly, I think the loss of interest in orchestras is because of the shortening human attention span, not because of diversity. I think actually in some ways the diversity push may have helped. And that is part of what the diversity people like to advocate for. They say, well, the reason that you don't have a lot of Black people in your audience is they don't see a lot of Black people on the stage. And like with your Hispanics example before, that's something that we can all be sympathetic to. We want to see connection. And you and I are pretty normal looking white guys. We have not experienced a life in which the mainstream didn't represent guys that look like us. So the minority people do have that kind of power over us of lived experience. But I don't know if it's ever come to fruition where, putting more minorities in orchestras has brought in more donors and more audience members and widened the reach of orchestras. I really don't know because I'm not really in the game. But I was suspicious from the get-go that was the way to go. Because like I said, I didn't exactly go watch the New York Knicks when I was a kid and saying, what would really make me enjoy this more is if I could see some more white guys on the team. And again, I get the argument that I'm white, so I don't have the problem of not seeing myself represented everywhere, but I just really don't care. I want to see great product. And if the Black guys are better than the white guys at basketball, I want to win. I want the Knicks to win. So let's go for it, man.
What was it like going through cancel culture on a personal level? Most people, they have an idea, they've heard the term, but they haven't actually experienced the being in the middle of attacks is probably a strong word, but I don't think it's an inappropriate word to use in this context.
Not at all. So maybe before I answer that, we can sketch a little background for the listeners about exactly what happened. Can I give a little overview of the event?
Please.
So the event is very public. It's written about in the Washington Free Beacon. There's an article by Aaron Sibarium, who I consider the best writer on the topic of anti-racism and DEI takeovers in the late part of the 2010s and the early 2020s. He's done so many great articles, and he really gets it in universities and in lawfare and orchestras. And I knew I would find somebody to write the story. So what we saw in the orchestra was a major effort to diversify the orchestra, and a temporary player was brought into the orchestra who was Black. He was a good player, maybe slightly underqualified from an experience standpoint, but I don't hold that against him because everyone is inexperienced when they join an orchestra. Like even when I joined the orchestra, I was only 26. I had won an audition for one position when 300 people applied for it, and I was very much not really ready to be a principal clarinetist on my first day. But you have to grow into the job. So we were hoping that we could hire a temporary player without an audition and kind of groom this player for the permanent position. That was my hope because I felt the pressure coming from everywhere. In the culture, like we need to get more Black players into the orchestra. And there was no orchestra in the country with a Black principal oboist. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if Nashville, Music City's orchestra, became the first orchestra to have a Black principal? So the idea was to just train this guy up, have him over to my house, befriend him and coach him and support him through the audition process, because he had to win his job via the audition process, even though he was acting in the job, which he basically did. He auditioned against like 170 people for the job. He was the last man standing in a blind audition. And because of a procedural breakdown, his identity was compromised in the final round of the audition. And our conductor and the rest of the committee came up with this idea in the very heated moment of an audition after 3 days of listening to oboe players all day long that, we just know from playing with this guy for a couple years that this guy's not up to snuff. And let's not hire him, kick him to the curb, and we'll never speak of this again. And I basically said, over my dead career, will this be allowed to stand? This guy is my friend. This is a total miscarriage of justice. And when this gets out, this will destroy the country's faith in the Nashville Symphony. They will say that we cannot hold fair auditions and we'll never get a good candidate again for anything. So we're going to reverse this decision. We're going to put this guy back on track, and I'll get behind him. And he sort of imploded after that. He knew that he had been lied to, and he decided, in order to deflect the negative attention going on to him, to go after me, because I had been militating against his ideology for a year. Like I said earlier, I was no innocent bystander. Like I saw who he was. I saw his ideas. I talked about it with him deeply, and I took some pretty unorthodox approaches to trying to drive those bad ideas out of his mind. But this is religion for the guy. And he ultimately, because I would not come over to his side of the ideological battle, he became convinced that I was some kind of white devil and circled the wagons of HR and threatened lawsuits against the orchestra if they didn't get rid of me. And that's exactly what they did. Kind of ashamed of how I lost my cool, and things got ugly. It's all public. And now I've become a much harder hearted person as a result of this. This is me getting to your question now. Like, what is it like going through this? One of my personal flaws is I'm a very trusting guy. I grew up in a high trust society in New Jersey. I come from a good family. The world has been really good to me. The world has rewarded me when I showed up trying to get jobs, like in the Broadway show, when I was, like I said, 400 people showed up for 3 jobs and I won one. When I showed up for the Nashville Symphony, and 300 people going for 1 job, and I got it. When I got into a good college, when I showed up at Salesforce, when 400 people applied for 7 jobs, I got one of them based purely on merit. So I have had the world reinforced to me many times over that if you do a good job and you work hard and you're a good people person and you show yourself to be trustworthy, the blessings will shine upon you. It's not that I'm more cynical now, but I'm a lot less likely to trust people who have an ideological agenda of any kind. And maybe I would have acted differently. Maybe I would have been a little bit more Machiavellian back in 2019, because I honestly, as accomplished as I have managed to become as a musician and as high level as my playing is, I never really was in a position of big power where I could influence decisions until I had the power of the truth of that audition behind me, and everyone was looking to me as the only trustworthy guy in the room. And I don't like to misuse power to punch down, and I had never really encountered people who are willing to do anything they have to do to get ahead, including stab their friends in the back, lie publicly, double down on their lies, and just in a postmodern fashion, get into a powerful position and try to make the truth different than what it is. It was really just like a total eye-opener to see what it's like to watch somebody operate under the assumption that there is no such thing as truth. There's only power. The Nashville Symphony meltdown is a great example of that. And it's a good story to kind of dip your toes in the world of postmodernism. I know, David, that you've written on that. You've thought about that subject deeply. And I was really just naive and too trusting. And so I've changed a lot on that. I don't speak out as much at my workplace now as I used to. I just kind of turn my head the other way and keep my head down. Tech is obviously different than music, but I am outspoken on the internet because I paid dearly for the price to be able to say whatever I want about the music industry, including basically being exiled from institutionalized classical music. And so I feel like if I don't speak out, I'm not getting the returns on my investment of being a free speech American that will like actually stand up and say the things like, you know what, I don't care if there's more black people in this orchestra. I'm fine with either way. Like, I'm cool to just keep doing what we were doing, have blind auditions, make sure we reach out and make it possible for the underprivileged to have maybe a better chance. Like, we want to do a little affirmative action type stuff to maybe bump up our numbers. That's cool within reason. But what happened in the Nashville Symphony was totally outside of the bounds of reason. And still now, whenever I talk about it publicly, I'll get some hatred from people online. I get anonymous letters in my mailbox. I get symphony people showing up on my doorstep to shout me down. This still happens. And I've just learned how to deal with it. Just keep my head cool and not get angry, and just try to increase my level of eloquence, because, raging out about it doesn't really win you any favor. You have to outsmart the opposition. You have to use their tools against them. And it starts with the taming of the tongue, and with an understanding that this is not a war over your job and your workplace. This is like the spiritual warfare of our day. And that's kind of how I view it. I mean, like I said, I'm Catholic. I view this kind of like as a crusade. And this is like a spiritual venture. Music is not just a job. It is a vocation. It's like a calling for people. And I approach this, what I'm doing right now, and talking to you and tweeting about it and thinking about it and continuing to be part of a community that has sort of turned its back on me, but can't turn its back on me because they want the best player, which I still think I am. It's not as easy as it used to be, but I was willing to take this on. I had many opportunities in that cancellation experience to just relent and say, you know what, I was wrong. I will kneel before the gods at the altar of DEI and confess my white guilt, just like everyone around me did. But I say, no, I do not feel guilty for having an opinion that I worked hard to get the vote for, to be able to vote yes or no on any player, and to say, yep, I like this guy, or I like this girl, or I do not like this guy, without their gender, sex, or race coming into the equation. Like, blind auditions are what they are, and you need courage to vote and to speak the truth. And I've just tried to become more courageous, more eloquent, and less emotional about the whole thing.
Yeah, I forget who had said it, but it was like the three stages of human understanding, one of which was sort of like childlike naivete, which I think a lot of people conflate with optimism, like, oh, the world is so great. And then cynicism arises, this sort of recognition that, oh, actually, the world's not so good, and life is a catastrophe, and people die, and people are going to hate you, probably for no good reason. And sometimes you put yourself in the path of somebody who just hates you. And I understand why a lot of people end up in the cynicism category. But then the third one is true optimism, which is the recognition of the catastrophe of the world, but also the belief that not only things can be better, but things will be better. I'm curious if that's something that you've come to, or how you grapple with that, particularly being Catholic.
Yeah, that's a really great way of describing the three stages. I have not heard that formulation before, but I like that. I would say that one thing that happens to professional musicians, like, there's this funny meme or joke that has gone around that's like a kid saying to his mom, like, Mom, when I grow up, I want to be a musician. And the mom says, well, you can't do both, son. Like, music keeps you young. It's great. It keeps you in a world of fantasy. And having been a professional musician for 20 years where I didn't really have a job, I felt like I was beating the system. Like, I was raising a family, paying a mortgage, and living a dream without a job. So I just felt like a kid in a candy store the whole time. So that was my stage one. Then the world got real with the loss of that dream. But I never did become cynical, because I do have a long view of things. And, my father, who's Catholic, when I was young, he was fond of saying to me, you will be rewarded in the kingdom of heaven. And, Catholics have a long view of suffering. And they have a way of seeing suffering as something with purpose that transforms you and purifies you. And that's how I view it. And I remain optimistic, because a lot of the suffering I've gone through, I've been able to eliminate a lot of it because of outgrowing some of my childhood naivete about the way the world is. So I'm optimistic that I personally can still live a fulfilling life with music. And another thing about Catholicism, that I'm recently returned to Catholicism in the last couple of years. I've always been a practicing Christian for my entire adult life, but I only recently reverted a couple of years ago and feel like I'm home now. But music has an interesting place in the Catholic classical education. There's this thing called the trivium, which is the combination of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which are the three main subjects of the basic formulation of a person. And then there's the second order quadrivium of astronomy, geometry, music and geometry. Did I say that right?
The
Astronomy,
geometry twice.
geometry, astronomy, music, and arithmetic.
Hmm.
So those 4 disciplines are there to buttress the trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So if you study some ancient saints, like I just studied, I finished a biography of Saint Dominic recently. He was my baptismal day saint, and I was baptized in infancy on his feast date. He was born in the 1200s, and he sort of spent his life fighting heretics, and he did it successfully with eloquence. But one thing that kept coming up in the book was that when he was traveling from place to place, he was often found singing to himself, like singing, chanting, and antiphons as a means of synthesizing knowledge. And, music lives in this world of abstraction. People are fond of saying, where words fail, music speaks. I think it was Hans Christian Andersen that said that. But, that music goes beyond what language can express. And my view of that is that, yeah, music can go beyond, but it's not concretized in the way that language is. However, music can help you kind of abstract meaning and thought and knowledge in a way that allows you to get better at distilling your thoughts into language, which language is the best way to get your thoughts across. As much as I love music, knowledge is best preserved in language. So that has made me love music even more as I have lost it from my day-to-day life on a certain level and begun to understand it. Therefore, like, I discovered, for example, that I can't really write complicated software with music on. Music is too arresting of my attention, so I have to work in silence a lot of the time, or I have to pick certain types of music to listen to which do not distract me. I find highly rhythmic music like dance music or house music to be very distracting while I am trying to write code. So I'll use like, I like to listen to chant, which is more harmonic and less rhythmic, but I therefore get to reward myself at the end of a hard work day with some very intentional music listening. And, being outside of the symphony where you end up playing a lot of music that you don't like for pops concerts or kiddie concerts or whatever modern composition or old composition you don't like, I can be much more selective with what I listen to. So my optimism is increasing about music as I have learned to revere it more, if that makes sense. So, I'm not necessarily optimistic about the state of institutionalized music because these ideas are so ingrained. Like, people are fond of saying, well, look at what Trump is doing with the National Symphony in Washington, D.C. He took over the board of the Kennedy Center and he's fired their CEO. And now there's protests and he has no idea what he's doing. This is going to be so bad for the arts because he's cutting the NEA grants. And so there's like a lot of gloom and doom. It's naive to say that Trump is actually going to be able to do much about this, because while maybe he can get some wins in lawfare, the ideas that have been baked into left-leaning orchestras over the past 20 years are so ingrained. They have so many people in administration that are dead set on the ideology, who think that in 2028, they're going to vote Republicans out and just turn the lights back on and go back to exactly what we were doing in 2020. So I don't think we're going to see really much change in a generation or two. So I might not live to see the end of the DEI era in classical music. But what's great is that a really great performance of Beethoven 5 or Beethoven 9 or the Verdi Requiem still hits big time. People still feel that. Like, it's still a major event when an opera company does the Ring cycle. People still walk out of there in tears. So the artworks themselves are preserved. They're on the page. We can still do them, and they are going to outlive you and me. I'm optimistic about that. And I think this too shall pass with the current cultural climate of classical music. But it just might take a while. And, I come from the exennial generation, I'm like very end of Generation X, early millennials, where, I didn't get a computer or the internet in my house till I was like 13. So people like me grew up, in a totally different world of consuming the arts and practicing their instruments. I feel like a lot of these younger players now have gotten so good at the audition game. Like they're unbeatable. Like people have asked me all the time, are you going to try to make a comeback? And I honestly cannot imagine taking another audition. These kids have had so much training. They have studied the process so much. Like I'm just like an old geezer out there. Like there's no way. Like I would put my playing in the job against anybody, but in that Olympic type situation, like I just cannot even conceive of it. When I was 26 years old, it took me like practicing for 2 months, 3 hours to 6 hours a day to be competitive. And that's when I had no kids and I was hungry and desperate. So now we have these younger people who are so well versed in the audition game, but their attention spans are shorter, and um, their ability to show up in the job and be professional and be good listeners, it's different. It's a different type of player that we're dealing with now. So I feel like my responsibility is to just hang on to the knowledge I have about the way things used to be, keep the values strong, and figure out a way to impart what I know via speaking or writing or playing or performing or recording about what I think is good. That's the American way. Like we have the ability to create whatever content we want, to perform however we want, to charge whatever we want, whatever we can for our art. And, I really think the way out of this all is to create new ways of performing, new ways of reaching people. We can use the old music, we can write new music, but I'm much more focused on um, repurposing my knowledge for the modern age rather than trying to get back into the game, which is totally controlled by people who I have openly spoken against and set myself apart from.
On that point, just to pivot for a moment, I'm very interested in the way you've been able to diversify your career. So obviously, musician, recording musician, clarinet, classical music, orchestra music, software, and you're also a hair model.
Yeah,
How
I
does
have
one
done
get
a
into
little bit of
that?
that. Well, you know, that's a good question. Like I just I started going to this salon that kind of popped up near me, and there's some guys there that like really like my hair, and I don't even really like having long hair, but I'm not that tall, not the best looking guy, but I do have great hair. And my wife really and my kids really like my long hair. So um there's some cool product companies that have partnered with the the place where I go get my hair cut, and I've done a few photo shoots, and you know it's kind of hilarious, but it's just like I work with what I'm given. And I've gotten in trouble for it. Like hair is a big topic in DEI, talking about how various cultures can wear their hair. It's like there's nothing they won't attack. So honestly, like for a while, having long hair and being like somebody with great hair was like one of my weapons against demons. But yeah, I you asked about the diversity of my career. It's just I want to achieve mastery wherever possible. I tend to go do things that I'm good at. Like I'm big into working out, even though I'm not athletic in a way that would allow me to like play basketball or sports where I might get injured. I'm good at working out. I like to practice yoga, and I I'm do a lot better when I'm doing something that I'm good at. And software is something that I've always been interested in, and it was an obvious pick when I was stuck with no job and there was no obvious way back into the music industry. So I did a 6-month code school during the pandemic. I signed up for like this 6-month online code school through Vanderbilt, like right at the start of the pandemic. And the whole thing was online, and I practiced that for like as many as 11 hours a day sometimes. And it's very difficult. It's like learning a new language. And I was 37 years old at the time, and it does get harder to learn new things as you get older. And I I was also not super committed to it for many years because I had the naive idea that someday the Nashville Symphony was just going to call me back, apologize, and bring me back into the fold, which I realize now is not going to happen, even though it would make a lot of sense because they still haven't replaced me. They've had 2 failed auditions and there's still a sub playing my old job. And in many ways, it would make a lot of sense for me to make a return there. But institutions don't tend to apologize. It makes them lose power and exposes them to lawsuits. So going back to what you said about diversifying, like I like doing a lot of different things, but it's all about what is the most important thing in life to you. Like I said before, music is a religion for a lot of people, and it's a calling, and it's why a lot of musicians make terrible husbands or wives or fathers or citizens. There's a lot of jokes about guitar players and drummers floating around out there because, I think of what Charles Ives said. There's a really great Charles Ives quote who he did a lot of damage in the insurance industry. I think he went to Yale. He was a very smart, learned guy and kind of composed on the side. And he said, I might be misquoting him, but he said something like, if a man has a nice wife and some nice children, why would he let the children starve on his dissonances? It makes you think, like, what I do at the end of the day is I'm a husband and father. That's what's most important to me. Going all the way back to what we said at the beginning, I chose the orchestra because it was going to allow that to be a reality. I wasn't going to have to tour around. I wasn't going to have to wonder where my next paycheck was coming from. I wasn't going to have to live an unstable life. The orchestra provided those things. So that's what really matters to me first. Because like I said, I'm Catholic. I have a long view of the life game, and I'm going to be judged by, the how well did I multiply and replenish. That's kind of what I feel like I'm here to do. Music is something I view as a gift. Like there's a lot of talk in the DEI world about privilege. And I'm an extremely privileged guy. There's no getting around that. I grew up with parents that could give me lessons. They had so many connections to theaters and contractors and jingle singers. And, I grew up with music in the house. I'm also an only child. That was not by design. My parents tried to have more and couldn't. So they gave me a ton of attention. I could always have nice instruments. And they took me along to all their shows that they were playing. So I was like just born into a situation which is was really perfect for a young musician. I also had a ton of time by myself, and I was like, well, I guess I'll get my horns out. Guess I'll play the piano. And I'm also red-green colorblind. That comes from my mom. So I think my ears developed a little bit faster than they would have. I hear beauty more than I see it. It's so ironic being colorblind and being accused so publicly of being racist because I actually literally live MLK's dream of colorblindness. Like I just don't see what other people see. So I'm very privileged to have musical ability, and I've led a privileged musical life. But one of the reasons that I have a healthy relationship with it, and it becomes more healthy over time instead of remaining just an obsession, is because I have my eye on the prize, which is a happy family. I want to have my daughters marry great men, and I want grandchildren, and I want to be able to enjoy that. And, if you're in a symphony, you're missing a lot of school plays. You're missing a lot of dance recitals. You're missing a lot of time with your family because you're gone at night a lot. So, you know, going back to Charles Ives, like, how can I provide what is best? Like, I probably sound pretty patriarchal right now. That's another thing that everybody wants to smash. But I think it's worked out pretty well for like most of human history until 5 minutes ago. So it's another thing that I'm pretty shameless about. Like, I'm the head of my household. I make the money in this household. I'm really into marriage. Been married for 20 years. It's it's hard to be a musician and be a good family man. And really what was getting so hard about it at the end of my symphony run was, I can't be expected to lie. I can't go to work and lie to my friends and stab a black guy in the back after he won an audition on merit and come home and look my wife in the eye and say that I did an honest day's work. And I can't have my kids hugging me and saying, Dad, I love you. You're such a great dad, knowing that like I didn't stand up for what was absolutely right. And I think I should have been treated a little better by the guy who ultimately got me fired, considering that without me, he would have been kicked to the curb. But that just goes to show you the depths of ideological possession. And it's very instructive. I feel sorry for all involved. I have a lot of regrets, but I do not regret keeping my eye on what really matters. And there are more important things in life than music. It's very important, and I love it. And I can't imagine what my life would be like had I not spent so much time with it, had I not confronted history and confronted sociology and philosophy through the lens of music. It's such a powerful educational tool. It's so great for character formation. Like I said earlier, it's so great as a discipline of the quadrivium to bolster up the basic things that every person should know: logic, grammar, and rhetoric. That's what we need to return to. And just understanding where music fits into that is what I'm trying to understand better now. Not how to be the best clarinet player, not how to get the best job, not how to make the most money, but to really understand and respect music for what it is, and just do whatever part I've been cast in to keep the level high.
Typically, at the end of the podcast, I ask the guest, what is a positive vision of the future that you would like to manifest? And the question, I think, is often misconstrued as, if you had magical fairy dust and you could make the world into whatever utopia you want, what would that be? And that's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, a visionary is someone who can look into the future and see multiple possible abstractions that are waiting to be brought into reality. So when I ask this question, I'm asking you specifically, what is something that you are working on right now? And you've already laid some of this out, but what is something that you see happening within the future that you would like to make manifest? That's good.
Well, within the lens of music, I'll answer the question this way. Every musician is an advocate for the art form in some way. And how he does this is up to him, whether he plays or he writes or he composes or he teaches. He has a role in keeping the art form alive. So my ideal vision of the future is one where the average person has higher music literacy than they have now and better taste. So how is that vision to be achieved? Every huge goal that I've accomplished in my life, I start with the vision. I start with where I want to be, and then I backtrack from that place to where I am now. And I worry about the next step. I think about the next step and the end game, not all the steps in the middle, because that's where life is like a game of chess. I'm really into chess, by the way. That pure chess happens in the mid game, but you have to think there's the next move, and I want to win. A win for me would be the arts are vibrant and orchestras do not die. And the music of Mozart, the people who are saying that Mozart is just white supremacist and, Eurocentric, and these people lose the game in the long run. And we recognize history for what it is. So what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to write or teach or speak? And it's a matter of improvisation. I go back to my roots in jazz. I'm way more of a jazzer than I am a classical guy. And I like to have conversations like the one I'm having with you. I like to just, if I'm in the middle of software waiting for some code to deploy and it's going to take a few minutes, I'll just bust out a tweet thinking about something something cool from a Beethoven symphony that I was thinking about while I was coding or something. And that has always led me to find my people. You can't find people unless you speak up. So that means you're going to alienate some people. You're going to get some hatred. But I'd like to encourage everyone to speak up. That is the foundation of America. Let your ideas collide. Get rid of your bad ones. And if there's anything that unifies people, it's the harmony of music. Music is so good at bringing people together. You know, food is good at this. Art is good at this. Philosophy is good at this. Music is really good at this. Getting people in a room to listen to music, to play music, to experience music, to dance together. I want to be a part of it. Maybe I'm not going to be on a symphony stage anytime soon, but I have some irons in the fire, and a lot of them are, content creation on the education front. I'm in a stage of life where I'm really thinking about how to instill it in my children, but they're going to be gone in 10 years, essentially. So I have a lot left in me, man. And I'm trying to keep that fire burning by playing sessions, having conversations, practicing. And just music is something you follow. It's funny, like you play it and the sound travels, and it's almost like I just want to chase after it. This thing that just came out of me, I just want to run after it into the hall, into the air, and just never let it get away from me. So whether I do that in the future by more talking or writing, it's anybody's guess right now. But that is my vision above all else, that we do not let literacy die. And I do whatever role I can to make sure that the literacy rate keeps increasing and people's appreciation for this wonderful world of music that we have continues to stay aflame.
James Zimmerman, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, David. Thanks for having me on.